This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Here's your host, Brandon Contes.
Alrighty, welcome to episode 69 of the Awful Announcing Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Contes, and this week we are joined by Fox Sports NFL insider Jordan Schultz. He's also the host of the new show appropriately titled, Why is Draymond Green Talking About Football with Jordan Schultz? Jordan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. And while I have plenty of questions about the Jets and the life of an NFL insider, I will first ask, why is Draymond Green talking about football?
That's a great question. All right, so during the summer, go back to July, mid-July into early August, I was thinking about how I could do a football show that was different than all the other football shows, because who wants to hear just me talk? But if I could find someone that could match my love of the game, but also that was a little bit polarizing and perhaps controversial, it would be ideal. But I also felt like it'd be really hard to do a football show with a current player just because of the scheduling. So I talked to a few guys, but the guy that really hit home was Draymond. He loves football, and I knew that he had played some spring ball at Michigan State, and I knew he was a big fan of the Steelers, even though he's from Michigan. But I didn't really realize it until we started talking that his knowledge of the game was really high. And he grew up with a NFL receiver, and he started to really fall in love with football over the last few years, dive into it in a way that I didn't even realize. And so when I started to push him in the conversations, I realized that he was pretty apt with his knowledge, and I knew how passionate he was, but I also didn't know how obsessive he was. And so we started talking about players and coaches and guys he liked and didn't like, and we had these 2 or 3 hour conversations, and then I flew to LA to meet with him to basically make the decision whether or not we should move forward. This was in the middle of August, and we had this almost 4 hour meeting in person, and we realized that a lot of the stuff we were saying was good content for a potential show. And so we just said, hey, let's do it. Let's just move forward and see what happens. And we've been doing it once a week. It's a little bit tricky now because he's in training camp.
Yeah.
But once a week, and we try to have at least one guest on every show. We've had, Pat Surtain and Joe Mixon. I think we're going to have some other good guys, and also not just football guys. Maybe I was telling him at some point, bro, you got to get us Braun or Steph.
Yeah.
I'm not going to push that, but I'm also going to keep asking.
Yeah. How long are each episode?
We were originally going to do 30 minutes, and then we decided after the first one that we had probably a little bit too much to say for 30, yeah. And so it's morphed more into 45. It's not a podcast because we're not actually putting it on Spotify or Apple Pods after. What we're doing is we're reclipping 3 or 4 of the best, I guess you could say, 30-second spots, maybe minute spots based on the guest and some of his takes, and then using that to put on social. And eventually the idea is to really push on YouTube, because I think I don't know where you feel on this, but we feel that really is a big part of the future, even more than it is now. YouTube is where you want to be. And I feel like that's the one medium where I have not been able to find success. I just haven't figured it out yet. And to have a show with Draymond that could, maybe break through some of the noise would be ideal. So that's probably where we're going next. But for now, it's really just on X, Instagram, and TikTok. And then obviously we post the live ones on his channel.
Gotcha. So is Draymond, is he analyzing football on this show? Is he giving more of a fan's perspective, just an athlete's perspective? Is he picking your brain? What is he like on this?
He wants to know, similarly, I think, to a lot of people, what's the pulse on the league each week. And so we try to hit that for a few minutes. So for example, this week, we'll obviously talk about a lot of Robert Saleh and the Jets and Aaron Rodgers and Devontae, but on a week-to-week basis, we try to spend a few minutes on that. And then we also do, we'll say to each other, what did you see this week that, surprised you or impressed you? And that could be something like a Jaden Daniels throw or a great catch. I'd say it's less scheme because I don't really know schemes. Like that's just not something that I didn't play football. I played
Yeah.
basketball. And so for me to break down football at a high level, I don't really feel necessarily comfortable doing. The only time I feel like I can do that is when I'm talking to coaches or players or someone that has a really educated opinion that I can then, break down and use as a way to make myself smarter, make the viewer smarter, and obviously, like an example of that would be, when speaking of Jaden Daniels, when he made that 4th and 2 throw to ice the game with Terry McLaurin against the Bengals, I wanted to know more what went into that throw. So I reached out to Cliff Kingsbury and I just said, like, what really happened here? And what I got was basically Jaden told Cliff and Dan Quinn, give me the ball. I'm going to win the game. Because I think they were up at that point, and then, they obviously could have kicked a field goal. But McLaurin had told Cliff and Dan, or told Cliff, if you get me on a go route, I can win in the corner of the end zone. But they needed to really trust their rookie. And it was all the sweat equity that had been built up throughout training camp with Terry and Jaden. Because up until that game, remember, Jaden's, like, McLaurin hadn't done a lot, and Jaden and him didn't have this big connection yet. And so that was a big moment and a big spot to do it on Monday night against a desperate team, and they really trusted him. So I was really interested in that part of it, not necessarily what the play call was or what defense they saw. I just wanted to know what kind of trust had been built up and what role both Jaden and Terry had played. And so then I reached out to some folks around Terry, and they said that they had been working on these types of go routes, hot routes a lot, but it really hadn't come to fruition until that point. So I just, like, that's really interesting to me. And then I can throw to Draymond and say something like, when you have a young player that, is coming into his own, a rookie, a guy that hasn't really done it yet, and they make that big play or that big defensive stop, they do something really positive in a really important spot. What does that then do, not only for him, but how does that change the perception of him in the locker room? And so then he can offer, it's basketball, but I think it transcends to football.
Sure.
It's to sports. And so those are the types of conversations that I think are really interesting, especially when it's a play or a moment that a lot of people saw and then they can relate to.
What was Draymond's reaction when you first pitched this to him?
So I didn't know him, but we had a few mutual friends, and everyone kept saying, I think you guys will really hit it off, but you got to give it a shot, and it's not going to be in person. So maybe we get on a Zoom or a FaceTime for a little bit. And so the first reaction was, I was actually on a call with the producer of the show, and he was the one that said, I think Draymond would be really appropriate for this role, but I don't know if he'd had any interest. I don't know if he's aware of what you're doing. And so he actually called him while we were on the FaceTime or while we were on the Zoom, and he said, what do you think about this? And Dre was really receptive, and he said, I love football. I'm really familiar with Jordan, but we don't really know each other. Let's actually move forward and get on a call. But that wasn't necessarily like as important to me as then the first call we got on, where I was starting to pitch things to him, and I would say something like, trying to think of an example. Like, I would be like, Dre, you're really aggressive toward the referee sometimes, right? Like, I use these words that I think could trigger him, and I say, but the perception that I get in talking to you, and then we had this conversation subsequently in person, is in person, away from that setting, you're super relaxed, and it's not the same guy we see on TV, whether you're commentating for TNT or you're playing and getting kicked out of a game. Like, this is a different person. And what was really interesting to me was I wanted to know how open he would be to discuss these things. And he was super open. And his idea was, I can have these conversations with you in a way that maybe I wouldn't necessarily have on my podcast when it's just me or it's another basketball player. But you, like insider reporter, maybe you can probe a little bit. And he would say things like, I'm really comfortable. This is him talking. I'm really comfortable being like this villain. I don't necessarily need to be liked by everyone. And, he'd give an example of maybe a player that would try to challenge him during a game and almost assume the role that he has against him. but he would tell that player throughout the game or throughout multiple games or a playoff series, here's why you can't do what I do. And I thought that was so cool to hear, because Draymond is super smart and calculated. I did a podcast years back with CJ McCollum, and CJ is similar to Dre in some ways, not with the polarizing, but he's really thinking about the next step. And I think that's why he's now with the NFLPA or the NBA PA. That was really important to him. And he wanted to mold the image at a young age of like, I'm going to go beyond just the game. And I think with Draymond, he was really open in these conversations that we had early about that we could have on a show in a public forum about, obviously he's going to be a Hall of Famer. He's won 2 Olympic gold medals and, 4-time All-Star Defensive Player of the Year. But way beyond that is a person that for the longest time, going all the way back to like grammar school, high school, has been willing and almost happy and eager to be the one that's the odd man out in terms of being liked. Like he's not just okay with it. I think he welcomes the criticism because he knows that if he has some kind of 50-50 split of some people who really like him, some people who don't really like him, but they want to hear what he has to say, that's a win.
I know you said this show is not a podcast. It's not affiliated with The Volume at all, right?
So it's not with The Volume. Obviously, I just started with Fox and Colin.
Right. So that's why I asked with Draymond being at The Volume and then you going on Cowherd's show. I didn't know if there was a connection at all there.
So there's no connection other than the fact that I think both of us have gotten, really friendly with Colin and, me going to Fox. I give Colin probably more credit than he would want because he's very humble, but he was the one that really welcomed me in and I think facilitated a lot of these conversations with Fox. And I've told him multiple times now, like, I don't think he realized the impact he had. He certainly it's almost as if he was just like, I'm going to take a chance on this guy and I believe in him. But he didn't really there was really no upside for him to do it other than just trying to help a young reporter. I'm blown away by what he's done. And actually, I've asked him about the show with Draymond, and he identified Draymond, I think, in a similar way of, this guy has a lot to say. Let's try to build some synergy here and see if we can't, find a show for him. And that's ultimately how Draymond got on The Volume. But no, to answer your question, Brandon, it is a separate affiliation.
Yeah. So how did you become a regular on Colin's show? Because he sought you out as a guest, because he is somebody, he seems pretty selective about the guests that he puts on his show.
He is. I think, if you go back and you look at some of the successful reporters or analysts that have come through the ranks of Fox, a lot of them, I think, had Colin's, backing, because he's so well respected inside that building and in the company. Whether it was Joy or Nick Wright, now you see Danny Parkins on in New York. And I wouldn't say that, I'm trying to go back. So I actually knew Joy relatively well. And so I was in LA for a wedding, ironically, about a year and a half ago. And I said to Joy, I'll be here for the next 4 or 5 days and maybe I could come on if you'd have me. And so she got me on. And then what I realized was, and Colin actually, she was filling in for Colin at the time.
Okay.
And what I realized was that maybe not necessarily that day or that week, but in the coming weeks after, I realized that the key is just to be available. You have to be available, but I don't live in LA. So what I would do, and I don't even think I've told Colin this. What I would do though, Brandon, is I would fly to LA and I would tell Colin, I'm in LA for the next few days. But here's the kicker. I actually wasn't there yet. So I would book it. I would book a ticket, or I would tell Colin, hey, I'm going to be in LA Thursday and Friday. And then I would talk to the booker and we would go back and forth and he'd say, we could actually use you Friday at 11 a.m. So I would book a flight like on a Thursday night and then be, I'm here. So I'll just come in. And then like they would say to me, are you available next week or in 2 weeks? And I would say, actually, I think I am coming back to LA. And so I would just constantly be telling them, I'm going to be here next Wednesday or next Friday or in the next couple of weeks. I know I'm coming to LA. And I would just keep throwing those out as available times that I knew I could I could make work based on my schedule.
Sure.
And potentially that could lead to them saying, we would like to have you on for this segment. But there really was no rhyme or reason, or I didn't have any plan with it. And then naturally what happened was I started going on enough where I would talk to Colin in between or after a segment. We'd grab a coffee. We started that, that coffee or smoothie led to, hey, let's grab dinner. You're coming on tomorrow. Hey, let's meet me tonight at 7, and we'd have a glass of wine and some pasta. We just really like getting to know him on a personal level. And I remember I was there during the NBA playoffs last year. There was a Knick game on. We were meeting in the South Bay for dinner. And I came in, and the hostess or the waiter said, Colin comes here a lot, but he doesn't usually bring anyone with him. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And they go, well, Colin, he's going to be, when he's here, he likes to watch the game, and he's pretty focused. So, good on you for coming. And I asked Colin, he was like, well, I know you love basketball, and I know you're only here for a night. So I figured, let's make it work. He was incredibly gracious. And there's really no doubt in my mind that this wouldn't have happened with Fox had he not been so welcoming and also so supportive. And then I would say over the last, basically from the summer of 23 through the spring of 24. So somewhere in a 9-month period, I think I went out to LA 16 times, 17 times, somewhere in that range. And I was pretty frequently going out there.
Yeah.
And the first 5 or 6 of those were what I told you. I'm going to be here. Let's, maybe I can come on the show. But then that led to more of a, I'd say, recurring role, where they would say, we actually would love for you to co-host with Colin. J-Mac's gone for the whole week. Can you just come in Monday through Friday and do the next 5 shows with Colin, and we'll put you on speak 2 or 3 times. So then I realized, okay, maybe this is actually going somewhere. And then I started to do speak more, and they would say, hey, can you host this segment? Can you do the reads in and out and facilitate the conversation? It was almost like, we want to see if you can do that, or we want to see what you can't do. And I would say, yeah, of course, I'd love to do that. And then I would do that, and they'd say, nice job, do this a little differently. And then the next day they'd say, do this segment. And I would try to really take in that information, have it register, and then, make it applicable to the actual segment or multiple segments I was hosting. So I was finding more and more roles throughout that time. And then they would say, come out and do Colin for a few days. It was just constantly reoccurring. And it might not have been every week, but it would be at least every other week or once a month at the very least. And then eventually in the summer, we were able to find common ground on an actual, full-time position.
Yeah, no, that persistence is really cool. That's something that you hear those types of stories with kids coming out of college and trying to, let people know that they're available. But
they're available.
It's I think it's interesting to hear it at this level of just hey, going to Fox Sports and be like, oh, I'll be in the area if you need me. That's
what's crazy is I was staying 90 minutes away for that wedding. And so I ended up coming on 3 days that week, because I came on, and I think Colin may have seen it, and I didn't really know Colin super well at that point. Maybe we had talked a couple times, and they said, can you come back tomorrow, or can you do speak the next day? So I was driving, 90 minutes each way. And then if I remember correctly, my wife and kids, we were at the wedding, they ended up flying home, and I ended up staying to do another day or two of Fox. And I had no idea it would lead to this, but to your point, Brandon, it's availability. It's almost like an athlete being available, and not being in, just being available is a skill. I always used to say, when I was playing basketball, I played hoops in college for 4 years.
Yep.
I used to say that having a motor is a skill, and I didn't have a motor in basketball. So not only was I not particularly talented, but I didn't have a motor. That's why I didn't have a good career. But that's a skill, and I think being available is similar.
Yeah. I feel like Colin is somebody that would be interested in your backstory as well, being the son of Howard Schultz. And I say that because I think Colin and Mike Francesa are the two sports radio hosts who spend the most time talking about business and stocks and the economy and things like that. So you said yes, do you remember that Colin was interested in the fact that you're Howard Schultz's son?
Yeah, so that played itself out in a couple of ways. The first time I came on, he brought it up on the show, and I if you follow me at all, whether it's on any of the socials, or I tend to really stay away from that. Like I don't like to publicize it. I think I've tried to be. It's actually one of the reasons I moved to New York, because I wanted to get as far away from Seattle as possible. In Seattle, like my last name holds a lot of weight, for better or worse. In New York, like nobody cares. And that was really important to me. I also knew at a really young age, as I have explained to Colin, that I didn't want to pursue the family business. I knew it wasn't for me. I knew that I wasn't passionate about it. I knew I wouldn't have success with it. And I remember when I was maybe 16 or so, and I actually told this to Colin. I think this might have surprised him a little bit, at least at the time. But when I was about 16, I sat down with my parents. It was like my junior year of high school. And I sat down and I basically told them in no uncertain terms, I am not going to be Dad's replacement. And I actually think they knew that going into that conversation, but I don't think they anticipated at that age I would be able to communicate that. And I always felt like that hurt my dad. I've always felt a part of me that, my dad wanted me to take over for him at some point. He just turned 72. I always felt that, in his mid 60s, because I'm 38. So when I was in my early 30s, mid 30s, that I would start to maybe creep up. And by the time I was 40, have the opportunity to run the company. That was always in the back of my mind. But I never had the passion for it. I was always sports first, second, and third. That was always really what I loved. And so Colin has asked me both privately and on TV, but even more so, I'd say in one-on-one circumstances, Brandon, he's asked me about that and what that was like growing up and how that impacted me and my views. And I think he's always, what's interesting about Colin is he's really good at drawing comparisons, to your point, from like politics to sports to business to tech. He finds the middle ground. And I don't know if that made me more appetizing as a guest, but he always seemed to ask the right questions about not only why didn't I, but the experience of growing up in a small town like Seattle with that last name. And Seattle is so, I think, congruent with Starbucks. Like everyone just associates that city and that region with coffee. And it's really in many ways, because of my dad and Starbucks. But our paths, my dad and I, are massively different. And I've told this to Colin. Like, my dad grew up in publicly subsidized housing. His parents did not own a home. He lived in Brooklyn. And his only way out was a football scholarship to Northern Michigan. And, my experience as a kid, couldn't have been any different. I was exposed to celebrities, travel, food, good schools. I just had every possible advantage. And I always felt like me not pursuing the Starbucks or business route in some ways was a waste. And I say that because had I maximized all those advantages and been more assertive with it mentally and psychologically, that this is the path I'm going to take, I think it could have led to a really successful path. But then it's almost like the two sides of my brain. The other side tells me there's no way you would have been successful. You always would have been incredibly aware and almost obsessive about the fact that you're following in Dad's footsteps. You're in that shadow. And I'll never forget something my dad told me, which I told Colin in private and probably haven't shared really much publicly, is he told me sometime when I was in college, he said, if you ever did pursue this, I don't think you'd have success. And I was a little bit caught off guard. And I, what do you mean? And he said, because everyone would say, you just got this job because of me. And they'd be right. And that really hit me. And I had already made the decision that this was the path I wanted to take, which is really could not have been more different than what my dad did, but it definitely made me feel more comfortable with the decision in a way, in almost a strange way, because I felt badly hearing it at first, but then I felt good about the decision because I knew he was right, and I'll just leave you with this to that point. When I was like in high school and college, a lot of my friends interned for Starbucks. They would do like the month or 2 month internship during the summer, and I purposely never did it. I never wanted to be in that group. And I remember asking my friends, like, how did it go? And they all would say it was great, but I was always treated a little differently because everyone knew why I was there. And I always thought, well, if you were treated a little differently because you were my best friend and you grew up basically in my house, then how would I be treated? And how would it be for me interacting with other leaders and other CEOs, knowing why I was there? And I don't want to disparage anyone that's followed their parents' footsteps as their passion. Just for me, I knew I wouldn't be good at it.
Yeah, and I think it almost takes a unique drive to give that up and to want to do something different. And in sports media, like there's so many examples of nepotism, and I don't that's not a criticism like of those who utilize it. That's just a sort of fact and way of life in sports media. But I think it is interesting to see somebody like yourself who comes from this background of seeing all the advantages of what following in your dad's footsteps, the advantages that you could have had, and you still chose to do something different and become a sports insider, which it's a fun job, but it is tireless work. So I think it does highlight your drive. Like, do you feel that? And is that something that was sort of instilled in you from your dad?
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And it's something that I'm super aware of. There's so many ways I could take that. I would say it always bothered me, Brandon, that other kids associated, like, just, I didn't like to be associated with my dad. And it wasn't even like, it's not because I wasn't proud of it, just because I felt like it wasn't like anything I had done to earn it,
Yeah.
And, I didn't even know what that word meant, nepotism, growing up. But I knew that everyone would say silver spoon. And there were so many examples growing up that at the time I didn't register for me, but I think now I understand why I would have done certain things. Not only did we have Starbucks, but we also had the Sonics for like 7 or 8 years. My dad, think about like how crazy this is as a 14-year-old kid. My dad picks me up from basketball practice. I'll never forget this. He drives me home, and he was very quiet in the car ride, and I could never figure it out. And we get home, and I'm about to get out of the car, and he says, "Wait a second, I need to tell you something." And I had no idea where he was going. He goes, "I'm thinking about buying the Sonics." That's what he said to me, and he looked at me like to get my reaction. And obviously, as a 14-year-old kid, if you think about how strange that is and how awesome, but also rare, there's so many emotions at the time. But as a 14-year-old who loved basketball, this is like the greatest thing in the history of life. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the greatest moment of my life. And I could not have been more excited, over the top. And as he moved forward and ended up buying the team, we'd have these conversations as a family about now the responsibility that it means for my sister and I. We're going to be in the public eye a lot more. And I already had felt some of that with the Starbucks element, but the Sonics is a whole new level just because everyone sees you at the games, right? And we obviously our seats were on the floor. And so everyone I felt like started to get to know me, but they didn't really know me. They just see me. And I was super aware of how I was being perceived. And so that perception that in my mind of I need to go the extra mile to make sure that this person feels seen and valued, and that I know the names of every usher. And it was just things that I was watching my parents do that I wanted to replicate. And so fast forward to your point about like pursuing this career path, I was always really motivated and really hungry and really passionate about sports. But I was also arguably more motivated to escape again that shadow, that family name. I mean, I almost changed my last name at one point because I was so embarrassed by it. And so I think for me, like the relationship building of the job has been really valuable, and I think a lot of that is traced back to how my dad built relationships within the company. And I was always really driven, but I'm very specific with how I operate. I wasn't a particularly great student, certainly not in the subjects that I was terrible in math and science and really gravitated toward the things I cared about. And so this job is a very specific job. Like the touch points throughout a day with sources and the phone calls and texting, and it really applies to my skill set, I think. And I didn't necessarily know that at the time, but it goes to show you, like, I think if you do have a specific passion and you're obsessive about it, you're gonna have success. Like, it's almost hard not to have success if you do that. But it's also, Brandon, like this job can consume you.
Yeah.
And it's not dissimilar to what I saw with my dad growing up. He was consumed by growing a company into what it is today, like this iconic, ubiquitous brand, 40,000 stores and whatever, 500,000 employees are almost there at. So I always trying to find that balance. We have 2 young children. We live a life that is in many ways very normal, but also it's not normal considering where we live and how we live. And so I'm trying to find the balance for myself of not always being in the phone. I have certain like blackout times where I just put the phone down, and I've missed stories as a result, but there's just certain things I'm not willing to miss. And I think even my dad would tell you, as much as he tried, and he was there for my games, he was there on the weekends, but he was gone half the time, and he missed a lot. And that's just not something that I was willing to go to. It's at least not to that level.
Yeah. So you mentioned you're 38. Adrian Wojnarowski is 55, and we just saw him obviously retire from ESPN and the news industry, at least. Obviously, you're quite a bit younger, but do you at all envy Woj's ability to step away?
I thought about that the day and day after that he did. It's not that I envy it. I envy where he was able to get to and then step away.
Yeah.
I'm so, if that makes any sense. Like,
yeah.
Like because I so badly want to be associated in the same breath of him or Adam. I've gotten, quite friendly with Adam Schefter over the years, and he was someone that would give me advice and has given me advice, especially now that I've gotten into the football route the last few years. And I know Adam, for example, is close with Woj. They have the same contract, and I know that he's, talked about like how much longer he'd want to go. Similar age, very similar, peaks of their powers. I don't envy Woj stepping away, but I envy where he was able to get to, and that he was able to go out on his own terms. I know how consuming this job can be. Adam talked about it a lot when Woj retired. My hope, Brandon, is that because I focus so much on the balance of it, and that I do have limits. There's just certain things I'm not willing to do, certain games I'm not willing to miss with the kids and events. And I'm hoping that in the long run, that pays off more. And that when I get to that stage, 20 years down the road, that I'm not burnt out as clearly he seemed to be.
ESPN, they've obviously since now they hired Shams to replace Woj, but there were some reports about Jeff Passan or Adam Schefter switching over. I know you switched from the NBA to the NFL. I thought Passan made some sense for ESPN just because ESPN values the NBA more than they value Major League Baseball. But is that a switch that Passan could have made instantly, or is it something that would have taken time for him to get established in the NBA?
The only way that he could have done it instantly with like legitimate success is if Woj were to not only give him his contacts, but facilitate a lot of those relationships. And I don't see how that can happen. It's so demanding. And baseball's really, and I look at Jeff in 2 ways. He's really the only guy at that level doing it in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that makes it easier, but at the same time, it's almost harder because 162 games, preseason, spring training, the size of the roster is 25 plus all the minor league stuff, and there is a lot with baseball. And that was actually my issue with basketball. There wasn't enough 12-man rosters, small coaching staffs, the draft 2 rounds. There just wasn't enough volume to get in and disrupt, considering the stranglehold that Shams and Woj had. I don't see how anyone could go from one sport to another and have instant success. I think it's possible to have success if you're at that level and you're established and you have a reach. But unless you're getting not only the contacts from a Woj, but again, the relationships being facilitated, and there's so many of them, the volume, I don't really see how that could work. Certainly not simultaneous. If you were going to do it, you'd have to just do one. Because I tried.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is would Adam be able to do both? And I know you early on, you were trying to do both as well.
Brandon, I think I would say nearly impossible, but I actually think it's impossible. I really do. Because there's just so many, I said the word touch points earlier, throughout the day. There's so many check-ins, and there's things that I forget throughout the day. And sometimes that costs you a scoop, a story. Might forget to do it for a week. If you have two different sports, and then the multitude of players and executives and coaches and agents, and there's very little crossover. There is a little crossover between NBA and NFL, where some agents do have clients in both sports, but it's super rare. I guess if you had a great relationship with a company, let's say you have a great relationship with the CAA, who also represents the NBA, who also represents basketball, let alone football, then maybe some of those agents could create some relationships. But those relationships are built over years. And so to be able to make the switch and then to try and do two sports simultaneously is an impossible task, in my opinion.
So why were you trying to do two sports at once?
Because I'm an idiot. I'm a moron. I didn't know. Brandon, there's no roadmap or blueprint for this business.
Yeah.
There's no foundation of like, here's A, B, and C what to do. You just have to learn trial by fire. Even if you have a mentor. I mean, Adam's been really good to me, but there's no way to be able to show you the road. You just have to learn it. And so at the time, I thought being this generalist and being able to do all these different things was helping me. I thought having a multitude of skill sets in abundance, or plethora of contacts, I thought that was good, but it was actually hurting me. And the only way I found that out, and this is the trial by fire I'm talking about, is I got to be really friendly, and still am, with Max Kellerman, because our daughters actually were in the same school and became really good friends. So we pick the girls up and hang out for a little bit. And I remember one time I was watching a boxing match with him. We started talking, and I told him, hey, I'd love to come on your show sometime, your radio show. And I went on and I did well, and then I started doing First Take, and everything was going well. This is when I was at ESPN.
Yeah.
But he said to me at some point, like, I think it's really cool you're doing all this, but our producers don't really know what to do with you. They don't know what to call you. They don't know when to bring you on. They like having you on, but you don't really have a defined role.
Yeah,
and he said, I think it'd be really beneficial for you to just pick one lane. And that was really hard for me to hear, because I had put a lot into the NBA, but I also knew that he was right. And it really clicked for me. And there were a couple agents that had told me similar things, but to hear it from someone else in the space that was on this side of the wall was really helpful. So that's when I picked the NFL. And then I had some success in 2022 in the free agency cycle. And then I had more in 23. I broke Gronk's retirement. I felt like that kind of validated me and put me on the map. And then in 24, it really, fortunately, skyrocketed, and was able to break a lot of news, do a lot of networks. And then obviously the opportunity with Fox and Draymond came along.
One of your big NBA scoops a few years ago was reporting that Baxter Holmes had the bombshell Robert Sarver story coming out, and that obviously ultimately leads to Sarver selling the Phoenix Suns. But you reported that story was coming out a couple weeks before ESPN published it. What went into that decision of
Yeah.
reporting that news was coming?
Had I been in the position now, I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have. I always. That's something that I thought about a lot over the last. I guess that was like 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was 21.
Yeah, I got wind of it. I mean, it's so long ago, but I got wind of it through a couple people, and then someone. I think it was someone with the Suns. We had discussed it, and then a couple agents, and I had enough. I mean, I had a lot of people telling me this is what was coming out. This is the context of it. And I remember when that happened, you know, there was like this instant, like the Twitter feed went crazy, and it wasn't even really at the time I didn't look at it like a story I was breaking, because I knew that the actual story was coming out.
Yeah.
But I remember then I started to get some backlash from a couple other writers that I was friendly with, and when I got on the phone with them, and they said that here's why I don't think you should have done it, and I felt sick to my stomach. I never forget it, just a pit in my stomach, because I realized that it wasn't my place to put something out from another reporter. And I never actually talked to Baxter about it, because I don't really know him, but I did talk to some people at ESPN at the time, and there were some folks that were okay with it, and then some that felt like I should have waited, and maybe added context after his story came out. But that's a decision that was definitely a trial by fire decision that I've regretted.
Yeah.
I felt badly about it once I realized what maybe the mistake I had made, and then subsequently, it's something that I would, like I said, I wouldn't do that now. It was a mistake, and thinking about it now, and I wish I had a communication with Baxter, because he does such a great job with these long investigative stories, and I don't know, maybe at some point I'll reach out to him if he's receptive to it. But that was definitely a mistake, and something that I regretted.
So did you receive more backlash from the media and ESPN people, or the Phoenix Suns at that point?
The Suns, no, but I'd say it was more media members.
Yeah.
And it was certain media members that I had a good enough relationship with, where I talked to them, and then they explained here's why, in their opinion, I shouldn't have done that. And I totally understood it once they put it in those terms. I got it. One of the things that I've realized, not only since then, but really in the NFL space, is like just the need to go slower. And it's so counterintuitive to what the job description is, in terms of trying to be fast with the news. But there's certain things that you just need to slow down on, and take a step back and evaluate. And at that time, I don't think I had that in my DNA, and I would probably I'd probably say that was a contributing factor to helping develop it, because in the weeks after, realizing that I had done something that, I wish I hadn't.
You were not at ESPN at that point, correct?
I don't think so, but I had a lot of relationships at ESPN at that point, because I think ESPN was I think maybe it had just ended.
Yeah.
Because I got there in, I think, 17 or 18, and I was there for like 3 years. So I think I believe at that point it was probably a year removed or so, but I still had a lot of relationships in that building, if you will.
Yeah.
But no, it was definitely after.
You mentioned before your the friendship with Max Kellerman, which happened while you were at ESPN, and you said your daughters were at the same school. When you did First Take, was it you and Max, or was Stephen A ever on those episodes?
He wasn't. No, I did it with Max, and he was great. It was Max and Molly and me, and Stephen A definitely wasn't on those episodes.
Okay.
And I remember, because it was before the draft, the year Jalen Green got drafted and Cade Cunningham, and I was doing a lot of basketball for them, but it was just with Max. But Max had this ability to make me feel at ease because we had this relationship, and I remember him telling me, I was nervous to a degree. I don't really get that nervous doing TV, but it was such a big opportunity and big show. And I knew if I had done well, it could lead to more opportunities, especially at ESPN. And so he said to me, just be yourself. I'm gonna push back on some of the things you say, I'm sure, but it's all in good fun. Just be yourself and have your normal energy. And that was super helpful for me. I needed to hear that.
So we asked about why is Draymond Green talking about football? I need a podcast about why isn't Max Kellerman talking about football? Like what?
Yeah.
At this point, and it's been over a year, and I get the the fact that he was under contract at ESPN when they let him go, and he's probably collecting a paycheck still from them. But his ability to go from being on the radio and television every single day for decades to just falling completely off the grid. Like we don't get a podcast. There's no interview, no tweets, nothing. So, when is Max Kellerman going to resurface?
Yeah, to that point, Max's career started doing. It was when he was in college. Actually, I think it was in high school and then college. He did a public, like what's the public channel in New York, like free access TV?
Yeah,
he did a boxing show. Because I always wanted to know how he got started. He did a boxing show because he was really into boxing growing up, and and that's how he got started. That's how he ended up getting ESPN and HBO or Showtime, I think it was. And he was the perfect example of he found a niche that needed to be addressed that was underserved, and he attacked it. And he was really ultra aggressive with it, and I think incredibly talented. I've asked him that. We had dinner pretty recently, and I asked him, like, when are you making your next move? And he said, I got something really cool in the mix. He wouldn't tell me what it was. He said it was soon, and that it was it sounded really dope. Like I swear he did not tell me what it is, but it sounded like an awesome opportunity and one that he was super passionate about. Because you're right. I mean, he was on the air for so long. And then really he hasn't been for the last year plus. And I know he wants to. He's not just sitting around. He's been aggressive trying to find the right opportunity. But I get a sense that it's getting closer.
And a sense that it's sports related.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Max I think he's one of the most interesting guys, certainly in media, that I've been around.
Yeah.
Because his background, he's a New York City kid, well-educated. Then he had this horrific situation where his brother was murdered, and it's impacted his life. He's the first one to tell you, like, my brother was more talented than me. He was more gifted, and it's impacted him in so many ways. And I think he's tried really valiantly to live through his brother in many ways. But boxing is at his core. I think that's in his blood, and he's still boxing. He's actually invited me a few times to go boxing with him, and I box, but I'm always hesitant to do it with him because I know how he does Krav Maga. He does some crazy stuff, and but no, he's been great to me, and I really think that, like, we need him back on the air, and I'm hoping it's soon.
Yeah, I feel like people almost started to take Max for granted, maybe in the media space, and then now that he's been gone for over a year, people realize how good he was, and I think it'll be a big deal whenever he announces his comeback.
Yeah,
so that'll be interesting. How is doing Pat McAfee's show?
I love Patty. I mean, you got to know what you're going in. Like, when I go in on that show, the first thing they say is, "Oh, Silver Spoon, Starbucks." They, are you on your yacht? They just throw it at you. And I mean, I've been hearing that shit my whole life. And so, but the way they do it, it's more funny. And I tell Pat, I'm like, dude, when are you going to stop asking me these questions? Am I on my yacht? Am I in my 8th home? Am I on an island that I purchased? Like, I'm in my office. I'm working. Like, I'm here. And he's like, we're just gonna keep pushing that envelope. And so I really like Pat. I know that he is polarizing. I think he's unbelievably talented. I think he's a voracious worker with everything he's doing. But I think that I would hope the reason that I've been on that show as much as I have, and continue to be a somewhat of a recurring guest, is because obviously I hope to provide information, real valuable information, but also just to be able to be one of the guys. And they always have this thing with me. They always mess with me. I mean, one thing they do, no matter what, is if you watch whenever I'm on, let me re-explain this, because am I allowed to swear on this show?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, let's restart that. The McAfee group always fucks with me. One thing they do without fail is they put my camera view in a completely distorted perception of the show. So I might be like, they might put me like down here, like here, the way that they'll cut the camera, or they'll put me like here. It's so, and I can see it out of the corner of my eye. I can see the show, but I'm trying to answer the questions, and then they'll ask me serious questions, and I know they're just trying to throw me off. And it kind of works because I can see out of the corner of my eye. And sometimes they'll say, like, I bet he doesn't even notice. And then AJ will be like, no, he notices. He's just trying to be a professional. Because AJ is a straight guy.
Yeah.
I love AJ. I think AJ is a phenomenal guy. He's the straight guy. And then Pat and the other guys are always the guys trying to stir shit up. And so finally, I just said to Pat, we were in Orlando at the owners' meetings, and I came on and did like 15 minutes. And I think it was, I don't know, before or after, I said something like, this is the one time you're not going to be able to screw up my camera, because I'm in person. Usually it's virtual. But no, I really like going on that show. It's obviously has a massive reach, and it's been a really positive development for me.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly, I want to just ask some questions about the Jets firing Robert Saleh. We're recording this Wednesday. They fired him Tuesday morning. I assume Jeff Ulbrich will be the guy for the rest of the season. Do you think Woody Johnson wants to make a big splash going forward?
Everyone in that building loves Jeff Ulbrich. He doesn't have experience as a head coach, but he's really well liked. And because of that, he's going to get every opportunity to have that interim tag removed. I never got the feeling with him that over these last few weeks, like I didn't know that he was going to be the guy. I also didn't know Saleh was going to get fired this week. That one surprised me a little bit. But I didn't know that Jeff was going to be the guy. And then once he was the guy, I can tell you that it was almost, I was caught off guard at how well liked he was and talking to players and coaches. So he'll have every opportunity. I think the bigger thing is why now? Why now? Their take is we're 2-3. We're not where we want to be or should be, and we've already seen the script with Robert Saleh at 20-36. They're one game out of first. If they win on Monday night, they're in first place. So they still feel like they can salvage the season. We'll see whether or not they really make that push for Devontae Adams. I know both sides would like that to happen, but the Raiders have been asking for a second-round pick, and no team, to my knowledge, has come even close to that, including the Jets. But I think also the bigger picture is the ownership. Woody Johnson has been the owner since 2000. They have the worst, I wrote it down, 26th worst winning percentage since then. They have not been to the playoffs in 13 years. And they talked a lot about bringing Saleh back for this season and how they felt like I think he said in his press conference, this was the best option. I just find that really hard to believe when this was a super volatile coaching cycle. And you had names like Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick, who I know doesn't like the Jets out there, and Ben Johnson and Dan Quinn. There were a lot of really good hires available that they didn't pursue. So the whole thing is strange to me. The timing's odd. But I think if I'm a Jet fan, I'm just more frustrated than anything else that this ownership group has not been able to deliver on what they promised. And I certainly want Jeff Ulbrich to succeed, but it's never easy to be a first-time head coach, let alone in a situation where you're the interim and there seems to be some turmoil in the building.
Yeah, I think ultimately identifying that Robert Saleh wasn't the right guy is the correct decision, but I agree that the timing of it is what's a little bit odd.
Yeah.
Do
And
you?
just to be clear, like this was Woody Johnson's decision.
Yeah, that was the next thing.
He didn't hire Robert Saleh. That hire happened when he was the ambassador in London with Trump in the UK,
right?
And so by Christopher Johnson, and nobody knew this was coming. Saleh goes into work Monday morning to prepare for Monday night. And then Tuesday morning, he's there again early, as he always is. And he's preparing and watching film and delegating, and here's the game plan, et cetera. And then Christopher Johnson, Willie Johnson come down to his office and just tell him, like, you're out. Like, it's not that ownership can't circumvent the other the front office and the other coaching staff, whatever. I totally get they have the right to do that. But I think it really caught everyone off guard. I mean, defensive players were certainly shocked. Aaron, I was told, was blindsided. I mean, listen, I know Aaron met with Woody the night before. Take whatever stock you want into that, but it was not a decision that people inside that building saw coming. And I think as a result, that's made it even more hectic.
So do you think even if it wasn't Rodgers having the influence over making that decision, is it something that Rodgers might have had to sign off on?
I wouldn't go that far. I really wouldn't. I would need to know more to say that, or to have someone tell me that to say that. And so far, and I went deep into this yesterday, I did not get that perception at all. Listen, I know in many ways, and for any fans, Rodgers is running the show.
Yeah.
And I think it's really clear that if Joe Douglas, the GM, doesn't win, he's next, and he's certainly not safe. And his contract, I was told, by the way, expires this year. They did not renew it last offseason. So there's a lot there with Joe, but I wouldn't go that far with Aaron at this point.
Was it strange that Joe was not in that meeting?
That's what I'm saying. I think it is strange.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because normally when you have that process, the GM and the owner are. It's not even that they're in lockstep, but there's communication. My knowledge, I don't even think Joe knew. It's certainly not until the very end. It wasn't a decision that was talked about with ownership and the GM. And so, and then usually a GM not only is aware, but is a part of the process, the firing process. And I just think it's so strange, man.
Yeah.
Like, this is not how you, it's not good business. It's not how you operate a successful business. And again, just to have the owners come down to his office and fire him without any real communication prior, I just find to be unsettling.
We know how much Bill Belichick hates the Jets, but do you think Woody Johnson makes a call anyway, just to see is there any interest?
I asked that yesterday because it's very clear that Bill is not a fan of that franchise, and I was told pretty strongly no. As an NFL fan, first and foremost, I would love to see that.
Yeah, but
I would say that would be. I'd be really, really surprised if that's the route they took. Even to reach out, I think would be a big step, and that would. I don't see that happening.
Yesterday you had reported that Saleh was escorted out of the building by security. I saw then Connor Hughes, the Jets beat writer, had said that was not the case. He refuted it. So what's your understanding of exactly what happened there?
Yeah, I think what happened was the Jets are saying that it's normal, it's standard protocol to escort someone outside the building, a coach, when they're fired. I was told that from multiple people that after Saleh was fired, he got some of his stuff and security quite literally escorted him out of the building. I think some of the context is that the Jets have tried to add clearly is that this is normal protocol and we always escort people. I don't know if that's the case. I would take their word for it if that's what they're saying.
Okay.
But I'm not even saying I'm not saying whether or not Saleh should have been fired. I don't think he did a particularly good job, but I felt it really undermined him. Even if that is just standard protocol, I felt it undermined him, and I felt like it was an insult to him and the players to do that, almost as if what is he going to do? Like take a pencil or take his computer? I just didn't. I don't like the perception of that. And even if they're saying that's normal protocol to have security escort, I don't like it. I feel like it's not the right thing to do. The man, for better or worse, has been there for 5 years and has given a lot to the organization. I just feel like it's insulting.
Do local beat reporters ever get annoyed that they were scooped by a national reporter on a local story?
I've asked that to some of the local guys that I'm friendly with, and usually the answer is no. Although there have been a couple times on a big story that I've been able to get that they'll tell me, not at the time, but maybe at like the combine or at owners meetings, hey, remember that story? I had that, or I was working on that. And I do feel badly when that happens. It's not like, this job is not for the faint of heart. What's the word? There's not multiple winners on a story. It's who was able to get there first and who was able to be right. And I always feel like beat reporters, and I felt like this for a really long time, don't get enough credit for the value they provide and the insight they provide. And I've told the guys that I'm familiar with and some of the women that I'm friendly with that are on beats how helpful their information is for me to get and then potentially apply. And then I almost feel like it's bad for them. It's like for example, this happened recently. There was an injury that I didn't pick up on during a game, and I saw one of the beat writers talking about it on his feed, and I then looked into it and I realized, okay, this is something I need to pursue, and I ended up reporting on it, I think the next day or 2 days later. But there's no way I would have seen that had the beat reporter not been at the event and reported it. And I reached out to that beat reporter and I said, hey, just so you know, I appreciate the heads up. I didn't know, but and he was very gracious. But yeah, that's something that's on my mind a lot, especially when you go out to a camp. Like if you're at the Giants facility, if you're at a different Seahawks facility, wherever you are, and I'm always aware of that and try to be respectful.
So firing Saleh is one thing. The way it went down, the fact that it was a little bit messy, though, does that make the Jets less appealing to Davante Adams? Like, even if the Jets still want Adams, does Adams still now look at what's going on with the Jets and say, oh, maybe I should rethink going to New York? Yeah,
that was the big take. That was the big picture question I had yesterday. One of them at least, because Davante, he doesn't have a no trade clause, but and I don't think he has necessarily. I'm not sure he has the same amount of power that Ayuk had, because Ayuk was 100% going to be a long-term extension. Neither one has a no trade, but Ayuk at 26, teams were looking at him like we got to lock him up for 4 or 5 years. Adams in his 30s, I think there are certain teams saying this could be a rental for a year or so or 2, whatever it is. And as long as the Raiders are willing to take on a lot of that salary, we can make it work. But to answer your question, Adams does have influence in this, without question. And I think, as it's been told to me, the Jets are his top choice, along with the Saints. The Jets have Aaron Rodgers. That's the common ground. And I think with New Orleans, yes, they have Derek Carr. He's now hurt. I don't think they're in the same position New York is potentially to have success. I feel like the Jets in that AFC East can still win that division. I think 9 wins gets you potentially in the playoffs, 10 wins, and I think they can get there. But no, I don't think it's impacted Davante's outlook. It certainly hasn't impacted the Jets. They're still very active trying to get a deal done for Davante. Again, the Raiders not only wanted to, but are not willing to eat a substantial portion of the salary. This thing could drag on. And then you could see other teams, whether it's a Baltimore or a Buffalo, try to get in and take advantage of the Raiders losing some leverage. But the Jets want Davante. I think Davante would love to be a Jet. And I think the perception around the league, especially with executives, is that at some point here, New York is going to find a way to get it done.
Good stuff. Jordan, you were great. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brandon. Thank you, bro.
Of course. That is Jordan Schultz. I'm Brandon Contes. This is the Awful Announcing Podcast. Please rate and subscribe to this podcast. Please also subscribe to Awful Announcing's YouTube page. But regardless of how you consume Awful Announcing and the Awful Announcing Podcast, thanks for listening and be good.
Thanks for listening to the Awful Announcing Podcast. For the latest news spanning the sports media landscape and more, check out awfulannouncing.com and follow us at Awful Announcing.